My name is Clara Meadows, and for most of my life, I've felt like a book that was shelved in the wrong section of the library. I work as an archivist for the Historical Society in Port Blossom, a small coastal city that smells of salt and damp pine. It's a quiet job, a life of careful preservation, of piecing together narratives from faded letters and forgotten photographs. It suits me. I find more warmth in the stories of strangers from a century ago than I ever did in my own family's living room. My father, Robert Meadows, is a man built of ambition and polished surfaces. He works in investment banking, and his entire life is a portfolio to be managed for maximum return. My mother, Helen, is his prize asset, a woman whose worth is measured in social connections and the flawlessness of her dinner parties. Our family life was a meticulously curated exhibit, full of polite conversations that skimmed the surface of things, like dragonflies on water. There were no deep dives, no messy emotions, just the constant, quiet pressure to perform. But there was Eleanor, my grandmother, my father's mother. She was the sun breaking through a perpetually overcast sky. While my parents saw my quiet nature as a defect to be corrected, Eleanor saw it as a space to be filled with gentleness. She lived in a small, clapboard house inland, away from the coastal fog, in a town called Havenwood. Her world was a haven of scent and texture, the smell of rising bread dough, the fuzzy leaves of the African violets on her windowsill, the worn, soft cotton of her apron. Every summer, while my parents vacationed in places that would look good on a postcard and a balance sheet, I would go to Grandma Eleanor's. Those weeks were the realest part of my childhood. We didn't do much. We'd spend afternoons in her garden, my small hands learning to tell the difference between a weed and a seedling. She taught me how to knead dough not with force, but with patience. We'd sit on her porch swing in the evenings, listening to the crickets, and she'd tell me stories not of kings and queens, but of ordinary people who showed extraordinary kindness. She was a retired primary school teacher, and she had a gift for seeing the potential in small, unnoticed things, including me. When I was 10 and cried because my parents had forgotten my school's art fair, she didn't offer platitudes. She set up an old easel in her garden, gave me a set of watercolors, and said, "The world is full of people who won't see your colors, Clara. That doesn't mean you should ever stop painting them." Her refrigerator was a gallery of my clumsy attempts, each one held up by a magnet shaped like a smiling fruit. She saved everything. As I grew up and moved to Port Blossom for my job, our bond never frayed. I drove to Havenwood every other weekend. My visits were a quiet rebellion against the transactional nature of my parents' love. With them, affection was conditional, a reward for good grades, a prestigious internship, a socially acceptable partner. With Grandma Eleanor, love was the starting point. It was the air we breathed. I think my parents resented it. They never said so, of course. Their disapproval was a thing of subtle shifts and quiet omissions. It was in the tightening of my father's jaw when Eleanor praised my decision to study history instead of finance. It was in my mother's thin, brittle smile when I mentioned I'd be spending Christmas in Havenwood instead of joining them on a ski trip to Whistler. They saw her softness as a liability, and her unconditional love for me, I suspect, as an indictment of their own. Still, I never believed they were capable of true, calculated cruelty. Not toward her. Not toward the woman who had raised my father, who had held him when he was small and helpless. I was wrong. The foundation of my world, the one I thought was built on the solid ground of her love, was about to be shaken by a tremor of their making. And it began, as so many family tragedies do, with a promise that was too beautiful to be true. That October, they arrived at her house in Havenwood with designer suitcases and smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They brought an expensive bottle of wine and a store-bought apple pie, gestures that felt loud and foreign in the quiet comfort of Eleanor's home. The air, usually fragrant with cinnamon and yeast, was suddenly thick with performance. We sat around her modest oak dining table, the one she'd refinished by hand decades ago. She had made her famous chicken and dumplings, and the familiar, savory steam should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It felt like a prop in a play I didn't know we were rehearsing. I was thinking, my father began, his voice smooth and practiced, the one he used with potential clients. It's been too long since we've all done something together. A real family adventure. He paused for dramatic effect. The Mediterranean. All of us. Imagine it, Mom. The Amalfi Coast, the Greek Isles. One unforgettable trip. Grandma Eleanor, who hadn't been on a plane in 20 years, blinked in surprise. A delicate flush rose on her cheeks. Oh, Robert, that sounds heavenly. But all that travel. I don't know if my old bones could manage it. That's the beauty of it, he said, leaning forward, his charisma a tangible force. We'll take it slow. A cruise. You'd have a beautiful stateroom. We'd handle everything. No stress. Just sunshine and family. My Aunt Iris, my father's younger sister, chimed in on cue, her voice fluttering with enthusiasm. Mom, you deserve this. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. It's your turn. Even my cousins, who usually communicated only in grunts and screen taps, managed a vague, yeah, Grandma, it'd be epic. I watched my grandmother. She was stirring her iced tea, the spoon making a soft, rhythmic clinking against the glass. A lifetime of being on the periphery, of being the convenient babysitter or the expected holiday host, had taught her not to hope for too much. But I could see the cracks forming in her quiet resignation. A fragile, tentative hope was beginning to bloom. Then came the final, carefully placed stone. There's just one small hurdle, my father said, affecting a casual tone. The best suites, the ones with the balconies you'd love, require a significant deposit. The booking deadline is next week. We've pulled what we can, but we're a little short to secure the whole package. My stomach clenched. I knew this rhythm, this dance of want and justification. How short? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. My father's gaze flickered toward me, a brief flash of annoyance before the smile was back in place. Just about 50,000. I thought, since this is for you, Mom, to make sure you're comfortable, maybe you could help with the deposit. We'd cover all the other expenses, of course. The room fell into a weighted silence. $50,000. It was a staggering sum, a significant portion of her retirement savings. I opened my mouth to protest, to say that if they couldn't afford it, they shouldn't go, that this wasn't her responsibility. But I looked at my grandmother and I saw the expression on her face. It was one of pure, unadulterated yearning. It was the face of a woman who was being invited to the party for the very first time, and the price of admission felt insignificant compared to the prize of belonging. She smiled, a watery, tremulous thing. Well, if it's what will bring us all together. I suppose I could. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and tell her that love shouldn't come with an invoice. But I couldn't bring myself to shatter her fragile, beautiful hope. She finally felt seen by her children. And in that moment, I think she would have paid any price for it. The next morning, I heard her on the phone with her bank. Her voice was steady as she read out her account numbers, authorizing the transfer. I stood in the hallway, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I should have intervened. I should have told her to wait, to ask for proof of bookings, to question why her comfort came at such a high cost when my father and aunt had just bought new cars. But all I managed was a weak, "Grandma, are you sure about this?" She turned from the phone, her face illuminated with a joy so radiant it was painful to watch. She took my hand, her skin soft and papery. "Clara, darling," she said, her voice full of conviction. "They're finally including me. It's worth every single penny." My heart broke a little then. Because I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't an invitation. It was a transaction. And my grandmother, in her boundless, hopeful love, had just been sold a beautiful, devastating lie. The morning of the flight, Grandma Eleanor was awake before the sun, a quiet hum of excitement about her. She wore a pale blue cardigan, her traveling sweater, and a pair of sensible black flats. Her suitcase, a small, faded floral carry-on she'd had for years, stood by the door. It was packed with a lightness that was almost heartbreaking. A few cardigans, a novel, a small photo of my late grandfather, and a new swimsuit she'd bought a week before, her one concession to extravagance. I didn't want to be a bother with a big, heavy bag, she explained, her eyes shining. I forced a smile, the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing minute. At the airport, the air was electric with the chaos of departure. My father took command, striding ahead with the passports, issuing orders like a drill sergeant. My Aunt Iris fussed over her carry-on, repacking her travel-sized lotions for the third time. They moved around my grandmother, a whirlwind of self-importance that left her in a pocket of stillness. No one asked if she needed help. No one made sure she was keeping up. She held onto my arm, her grip surprisingly firm. My goodness, she whispered, her gaze sweeping across the vast departures hall. It's like a city unto itself. We reached the check-in counter for Aegean Air. And that's when the carefully constructed facade began to crumble. My father's voice dropped, becoming sharp and urgent as he spoke to the check-in agent. I could only catch snippets. Must be a mistake. Not showing in the system. Can you double-check? I moved closer, my dread solidifying into a cold, hard certainty. What's wrong? My father turned, his face a mask of strained patience. Just a little mix-up, Clara. It seems Mom's ticket wasn't processed correctly. A technical glitch, I'm sure. Grandma Eleanor's smile faltered. Robert? What does he mean, my ticket wasn't processed? He wouldn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the computer screen, as if the solution lay there. It's a system error, Mom. These things happen. But the flight is boarding soon. I don't think there's time to fix it now. Aunt Iris stepped forward, shrugging with an infuriating display of faux sympathy. You know, Mom, maybe it's for the best. It's a very long flight. And all that walking in the Greek villages. You said yourself your hip has been bothering you. Grandma Eleanor's hand flew to the delicate silver locket at her throat. Her voice was barely a whisper. But I paid. I gave you the money for the tickets. My father finally turned to her, his smile stretched thin, grotesque. Of course you did, Mom. Your generosity is the reason we're all able to go on this incredible trip. We are so grateful. He patted her arm, a gesture devoid of any warmth. You should go home and rest. We'll bring you back plenty of souvenirs. Photos, stories, everything. And then he turned his back on her. He picked up his carry-on and walked toward the security gate. My aunt and cousins followed, a silent, complicit procession. No apology. No final hug. Just a dismissal, as casual and cruel as sweeping dust from a pristine floor. I was frozen in place, my heart hammering against my ribs. All around us, the airport thrummed with the happy chaos of reunion and departure. Families hugging, lovers kissing, friends laughing. And in the middle of it all stood my grandmother, a small, solitary island of betrayal. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a confusion so profound it seemed to shatter the very air around her. I still remember the exact moment her hands trembled. She was clutching the empty boarding pass envelope the airline had given her, her knuckles white. Except there was nothing inside. Clara, she whispered, her voice cracking. He said there was no ticket for me. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold as ice. Then I'm not going either, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like a physical force. She tried to protest. No, honey, you've been looking forward to this. Not like this, I said firmly. Never like this. And so they boarded a plane to a sun-drenched paradise they had purchased with her hope. And we turned around, walking back through the sliding glass doors into the gray, drizzly November morning, the silence between us heavier than any suitcase. The drive back to Havenwood was a vacuum of sound. Grandma Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded primly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. She didn't weep. She didn't rage. She simply stared out the window, her face a mask of quiet devastation, as if she were watching a film of someone else's life. When we arrived at her little house, she walked inside, went straight to her worn velvet armchair by the window, and sat down. Without a word, she unzipped her small floral suitcase. One by one, she began to unpack. The pale blue cardigan. The new swimsuit, its price tag still attached. The small, framed photo of my grandfather. Each item was folded with a slow, deliberate precision that was more heartbreaking than any flood of tears. I stood in the doorway, a helpless, furious witness. My own pain was a hot, sharp thing in my chest, but hers was a deep, quiet sorrow that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. I wanted to say something, anything, but words felt useless, insulting. Instead, I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, my hands moving on autopilot. I made her a cup of chamomile tea, adding a spoonful of honey, just the way she liked it. When I brought it to her, she was holding an old, dog-eared photograph. It was of my father and my aunt as children, maybe 6 and 4, building a sandcastle on a beach. Their faces were bright with unblemished joy, and my grandmother was kneeling behind them, her arms wrapped around them both, her own smile radiant and fearless. "I really thought," she said, her voice raspy, not looking up from the photo, "that maybe this time, they meant it." I couldn't answer. The lump of anger and grief in my throat was too thick to speak around. I just sat on the ottoman at her feet and placed my hand on her knee. Later that night, long after she had gone to bed, I sat alone at her oak dining table, the screen of my laptop casting a cold blue light in the darkness. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then, moved by an instinct I didn't know I possessed, I typed a search query. Elder Financial Abuse Laws, Washington State. Link after link appeared. Articles, statutes, advocacy groups. I clicked on one from the State Attorney General's office, Protecting Our Seniors. There it was, in stark, unequivocal language. Financial exploitation is the illegal or improper use of a vulnerable adult's resources for another person's profit or advantage. This can include deception, manipulation, or coercion to obtain funds or property under false pretenses. My breath caught. False pretenses. Abandonment at the airport. It wasn't just a monstrous act of cruelty, it was a crime. I scrolled down and found a phone number for the Adult Protective Services hotline. My hand trembled as I copied it down onto a napkin. The next morning, I found her in the garden. The frost had touched the last of her roses, and she was gently pruning the blackened leaves, her movements slow and tired. I brought her a mug of coffee and stood beside her in the crisp morning air. "You don't have to pretend you're okay, Grandma," I said softly. She gave me a wan smile. "I'm not pretending, Clara. I'm just tired. And I don't want to be a burden to you. This is already hard," I admitted, my voice thick. "But letting them get away with it? That feels impossible. That feels harder." She looked down at the wilted petals in her gloved hand. "They're still my children, Clara." "I know," I whispered. "But you are my grandmother. You are my family. And I will not let them break you." She didn't reply, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a spark buried deep beneath the ash of her pain. That night, with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I made the call. A calm, professional voice on the other end of the line listened patiently as I recounted the entire, sordid story. When I was finished, she said, "We have a legal advocate in your county. His name is Arthur Finch. He'll be in touch." For the first time since we'd left the airport, I felt a sliver of hope. Not the fragile, breakable kind my grandmother had harbored, but a different kind. A fierce, resilient hope with an edge as sharp as steel. Arthur Finch was not what I'd expected. He arrived at the house 2 days later, not in a severe, intimidating suit, but in a tweed blazer, corduroy trousers, and a pair of kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had a gentle demeanor that immediately put my grandmother at ease. He sat in the armchair opposite hers, not as an interrogator, but as a concerned guest. "Mrs. Albright," he began, his voice calm and measured, using her married name with a respect my father rarely afforded her. "Clara has explained the situation to me. I know this is incredibly difficult, but it's important you understand that what happened was not just a family dispute. It was a calculated act of exploitation." Eleanor clutched her teacup, her knuckles white. "I don't want to cause trouble, Mr. Finch. They're my family." It was the same defense she'd used with me, a shield worn thin from a lifetime of use. Arthur nodded, his expression full of empathy. "I hear that from so many of my clients. But my purpose here isn't to cause trouble for your family, it's to seek justice for you. They coerced you into transferring a substantial amount of money under the false promise of a shared vacation and then abandoned you. That fits the legal definition of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I watched my grandmother's face. I could see the war raging within her, the conflict between a mother's instinct to protect her children and the dawning, painful recognition of their betrayal. I spoke up, my voice gentle but firm. Grandma, you gave them that money out of love, believing they were giving you love in return. They took your love and cashed it like a check. That isn't family. That's theft. Arthur leaned forward slightly. With your permission, Eleanor, I would like to begin the process of recovering your funds and ensuring this cannot happen again. It will involve gathering documentation, bank statements, any written communication, and building a case. The first step would be a formal demand for restitution. She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window, to the garden she had so lovingly tended for 50 years. Then, she looked back at Arthur, and for the first time since that day at the airport, her voice was clear and steady. All right, she said. If Clara thinks this is what we should do, then I trust her. That was the turning point. In the week that followed, Arthur and I became a quiet, determined team. We went to her small community bank, where the manager, a woman named Carol who had known Eleanor for 30 years, grew pale with anger as we explained the situation. She printed the transaction records without hesitation, highlighting the $50,000 transfer to my father's offshore investment account. We even drove back to the airport in Port Blossom. We found the Aegean air agent who had been on duty, a young woman named Sophia with kind eyes and a sharp memory. Oh, I remember her, Sophia said, her brow furrowed. The older lady. Her son was very insistent there was no ticket, that it was a system error. He seemed in a hurry to leave. It felt wrong. She readily agreed to provide a written statement detailing the conversation and her observations. With each piece of evidence, the story became clearer, colder, and more damning. It fueled my resolve. Back at Eleanor's, while I scanned documents and emailed them to Arthur, my grandmother would bring us tea and sandwiches, moving through her home with a new, quiet purpose. I could see the change in her. The slump in her shoulders was straightening. The defeated look in her eyes was being replaced by a glimmer of steel. One afternoon, as she was slicing tomatoes, she said, almost to herself, perhaps it's time they learned I'm not just an antique piece of furniture with a pension attached. Arthur smiled warmly. I would say you're a force of nature, Mrs. Albright. She blushed, a faint pink coloring her cheeks, and for a moment, she looked like the young, fearless woman in the old photograph. A few days later, Arthur called me. Clara, he said, his voice holding a new note of finality. We're ready. Ready for what? I asked, my heart beginning to pound. For their return, he said. We have everything we need. The bank records, the witness statement from the airline. I've drafted the legal notice. Now, we just wait. 3 weeks after they had left her standing in the cold, they came back. I knew their flight number and arrival time. Arthur had obtained the full itinerary from the cruise line, an itinerary paid for with my grandmother's life savings. I didn't tell her I was going to the airport. She was in her garden, humming softly to herself as she planted tulip bulbs for the spring. I told her I had to run errands in Port Blossom. She just smiled and waved, unaware that I was on my way to orchestrate the most important confrontation of my life. I met Arthur near the International Arrivals Gate. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, the kind that radiates quiet, unshakable authority. He held a simple manila folder. Inside was the culmination of our work, copies of the evidence and a formal summons, authorized by a superior court judge just the day before. It cited Washington state law regarding financial exploitation and demanded full restitution within 30 days, pending a civil hearing. Then I saw them. My father emerged first, tanned and self-satisfied, pulling a massive suitcase covered in stickers from Santorini and Rome. My mother followed, looking relaxed and radiant. Then came Aunt Iris and my cousins, all of them laughing, laden with duty-free shopping bags, their faces glowing with the kind of oblivious contentment that only the truly selfish can achieve. They saw me, and their smiles faltered. I stepped forward, and Arthur moved to my side, a calm, immovable presence. Robert Meadows? Iris Croft. Arthur's voice was not loud, but it cut through the airport din like a surgeon's scalpel. He extended a copy of the summons to each of them. They stared at the documents as if they were written in an alien language. "What the hell is this?" my father sputtered, his face flushing a dark, angry red. Arthur's voice remained level. "It is a legal notice regarding the financial exploitation of Eleanor Albright. You are required to respond to my office within 10 business days. Failure to do so will result in a formal lawsuit being filed." Aunt Iris ripped off her oversized sunglasses, her face a mask of disbelief. "Are you kidding me? This is insane. She gave us that money. It was a gift." Arthur raised a single, eloquent eyebrow. "A gift given under the documented misrepresentation that she would be accompanying you. That is not generosity, Ms. Croft. The law has another word for it: fraud." My father's furious gaze locked onto me. "Clara, you did this? You're suing your own father." For the first time in my life, I did not shrink from his anger. I met his eyes, and my voice was as steady as a rock. "No," I said, the words clear and true. "I'm protecting my grandmother. You used her love, you humiliated her, and you left her behind like she was nothing. She is not nothing. She's an old woman," my mother snapped, her composure finally cracking. "That trip would have been too much for her. But her $50,000 wasn't too much for you, was it?" I shot back. A stunned, ugly silence fell over their little group. Passengers swirled around us, sensing the drama, their curious glances like tiny pinpricks. Aunt Iris finally found her voice, her tone dripping with venom. "You were always so dramatic, Clara. So ungrateful." Arthur stepped smoothly between us. "This conversation is concluded. We will expect to hear from your legal counsel." And with that, we turned and walked away. I didn't look back until we reached the main doors. When I did, I saw them standing there, no longer looking tanned and triumphant, but pale and stricken, the shopping bags hanging limply from their hands. The joy had vanished from their faces, replaced by the cold, stark panic of consequence. They never responded to the summons. Arthur had predicted as much. "People like your father believe they are above the rules," he'd said. "They think if they ignore a problem, it will simply disappear." It didn't. The court granted a default judgment in my grandmother's favor. Full restitution of the $50,000, plus interest and legal fees, was ordered. But Arthur had pushed for more. Based on the egregious nature of their deception and the emotional distress inflicted, he filed a motion with the probate court to challenge their standing as heirs to her estate. When I brought the official court orders to the house, Grandma Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, reading them over slowly. A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was, I think, a tear of validation. "So it's real," she murmured. "They really have to answer for it." "I'm sorry it came to this, Grandma," I said, my hand resting on her shoulder. She looked up at me, and her smile was small and sad, but it was also the first truly peaceful smile I had seen on her face in weeks. "No, Clara," she said, patting my hand. "I'm sorry I let it go on for so long." That evening, she made a phone call to her estate attorney, a man she'd known for 40 years. I listened from the doorway as her voice, clear and unwavering, gave him instructions. "Yes, Harold, I'd like to amend my will," she said. "I want Robert and Iris removed completely. No, not a reduced portion. Nothing. They have already received their inheritance." Later, as we sat on the porch swing, wrapped in old quilts against the autumn chill, she said to me, "I'm not doing this out of spite, you know. I'm doing it for peace. And peace means you stop giving people the power to hurt you again." In the months that followed, we dismantled the last vestiges of their influence over her life. We closed joint bank accounts. We set up a new, protected trust, with me named as her durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy. "I want you to be the one to make the decisions if I can't," she said. A new, quiet rhythm settled over our lives. We took a watercolor class together at the local community center. She had a natural talent, her paintings of her garden full of a soft, gentle light. We volunteered at the town library, reshelving books and reading stories to children. She was reconnecting with the world, not as someone's mother or grandmother, but as Eleanor. Occasionally, a letter would arrive with my father's or aunt's return address. Thin, Hallmark card attempts at contact, full of hollow sentiment and devoid of any real apology. Eleanor never opened them. She would slide them into a desk drawer she'd labeled "Return to Sender" and go back to her painting. The following spring, the tulip bulbs we had planted in the fall burst forth in a riot of brilliant yellow along her front walk. She once told me that yellow tulips symbolized cheerful thoughts and sunshine. After a long, dark winter, her garden was full of them. That summer, I enrolled in a master's program for gerontology and elder law advocacy. My experience with Arthur had ignited something in me. I wanted to be that voice for others, for the countless Eleanors whose stories are never heard. When I told her, she wept. "I always knew you had a gift for caring for people, Clara," she said. "I just never dreamed you'd find it by caring for me." Life settled into a beautiful, peaceful cadence. 2 more years passed. Her paintings began to sell at local art fairs. She made friends, women who loved her for her quiet humor and her warm, generous spirit. The shadows of the past receded, replaced by the gentle light of the present. Then, one morning in late autumn, I found her sitting in her armchair by the window, a half-finished cup of tea on the table beside her. She was wrapped in her favorite quilt, her gaze fixed on the garden, where the last of the chrysanthemums were braving the cold. She looked peaceful, but her breath was shallow, her energy finally fading. "The tulips will come back, won't they, Clara?" she whispered, her voice as faint as rustling leaves. "They always do, Grandma," I said, kneeling beside her, taking her cool, frail hand in mine. She smiled, a faint, lovely thing, and closed her eyes. She passed away in her sleep 2 days later, as gently as she had lived. We buried her on a sun-dappled hill overlooking the town. Her funeral was filled not with family, but with the community she had built for herself in her final years. Her friends from watercolor class, the librarian, Carol from the bank, even Sophia, the airline agent, who sent a bouquet of yellow tulips with a simple card that read, "She mattered." After everyone had gone, I stood alone by her grave, the cool autumn wind whispering through the trees. I thought about the inheritance my father and aunt had lost. It wasn't just the house or the money. They had lost her stories, her laughter, her wisdom. They had traded a lifetime of unconditional love for a 3-week vacation. I still live in her house. I finished my degree and now work for a nonprofit, the Elder Justice Initiative, fighting for people like her. Every spring, I tend to the yellow tulips that line the front walk. They come back brighter every year, a stubborn, beautiful testament to hope. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the porch swing with my morning coffee, I look out at that sea of gold and I speak to her, a quiet conversation with the memory that lives inside me. "You didn't just raise a granddaughter, Grandma," I tell her. "You raised a witness. You taught me that the quietest voices often have the most important things to say, and that true strength isn't about how much you can take, but about knowing when to say enough. You raised a fighter. And that is a legacy that will bloom forever."